They didn't just fire me, they erased me. That was the thought looping through my head as I stood in the parking garage, staring at the cardboard box in my hands. 4 years of my life reduced to a stapler, a framed photo of my mother, and a mug that read "World's Okayest Marketer." The concrete smelled like oil and damp dust. Somewhere above me, a car alarm chirped twice before going silent. I remember noticing those details because my mind refused to accept what had just happened upstairs. Morgan wouldn't even look at me. She had kept her eyes fixed on her tablet while Chadwick delivered the news. "This isn't personal, Paige," he'd said, fingers steepled like he was closing a polite business deal instead of dismantling someone's livelihood. "The company is restructuring. We appreciate your contributions, the same contributions Morgan had presented as her own in the Monday meeting. The same campaign Chadwick had praised publicly, without once saying my name." I pressed the elevator button again even though I had no reason to go back up. My badge no longer worked. I'd tried it on the lobby turnstile. Red light. Access denied. It was strange how quiet the world felt in that moment. Like I had stepped outside of my own life and was watching someone else unravel. I slid into my car and sat there for a long time. The steering wheel felt cold. My phone buzzed twice, once from a coworker asking, "Is it true?" and once from Morgan, "I'm so sorry it turned out this way." I didn't reply. When I finally started the engine, my reflection in the rearview mirror startled me. My lipstick was still perfect, my hair still pinned back in that neat twist I'd worn every day. I looked composed, capable, employed. I wasn't. Before that day, my life had been predictable in the best way. I worked at Sterling Rowe Consulting, a mid-sized firm that specialized in operational strategy for manufacturing clients. I had started as a junior analyst, stayed late, learned the systems, memorized client preferences. By year 3, I was leading major accounts. Atlas Manufacturing was the crown jewel, the biggest, the one I had practically lived and breathed. My mornings began at 5:45 a.m. Coffee brewed while I reviewed emails on my phone. I liked the quiet, the way dawn slipped in through my kitchen window and turned everything pale gold. I'd sit at the small dining table my father built before he passed, laptop open, highlighter in hand. It felt honest, earned. Morgan Hayes came in during my 4th year. Fresh MBA, perfect posture. The kind of smile that showed all her teeth but never reached her eyes. She was assigned as my assistant, at least. That was the title. I trained her myself, walked her through client files, explained the nuances of Atlas's production cycles, the sensitivity of their CEO to sudden changes. "You have such a gift for this," she told me once, scribbling notes while I outlined a new efficiency model. "The way you see patterns," I laughed. "It's just attention to detail." But I felt proud. I won't pretend I didn't. Chadwick Sterling, yes, that Sterling, was the managing partner. Polished, measured, always smelling faintly of cedar cologne. He had a way of making you feel seen in meetings, nodding thoughtfully as you spoke. I mistook that for respect. Looking back, I see it differently. The first shift was subtle. Morgan began volunteering to present my slides in internal reviews. "You've been working so hard," she'd say. "Let me handle the delivery." I didn't think much of it. Public speaking wasn't my favorite part anyway. I preferred the building, the research, the architecture of ideas. Then one afternoon, I walked past the glass conference room and saw my projection on the screen. My color-coded workflow. My data model. Chadwick stood at the head of the table while Morgan spoke confidently beside him. He gestured to a graph. "Morgan's analysis here is particularly strong." My chest tightened. I told myself it was a misunderstanding. A slip of the tongue. He knew. Of course he knew. That night, I stayed until nearly 9, adjusting projections for Atlas's upcoming quarter. When Morgan passed my desk on her way out, she paused. "You're amazing, Paige," she said softly. "I don't know how you keep up with everything." There was something in her tone I couldn't place, admiration or assessment. The official unraveling came 3 weeks later. Chadwick scheduled a performance alignment discussion. I wasn't worried. My metrics were solid. Atlas had just renewed for another year. Morgan sat in the room too. That should have been my first real alarm. Paige, Shadwick began, folding his hands. We've noticed some challenges in collaborative leadership. I blinked. Challenges. There's a perception, he continued carefully, that you struggle to delegate effectively. Morgan shifted in her chair but said nothing. I felt heat climb up my neck. I delegate to Morgan constantly. Chadwick gave a thin smile. Yes, and she stepped up beautifully. Stepped up. The room felt smaller by the second. My accomplishments were reframed as control issues. My dedication, labeled inflexibility. Every example I offered was countered by a vague team feedback. I walked out confused but still. Surely this was a correction, not a conclusion. Then came the email from Atlas, addressed to Chadwick and Morgan, praising the innovative strategy Morgan presented last week. The strategy I had drafted at my dining table. That was the moment doubt turned into something heavier, something colder. But even then, I didn't imagine they would fire me. Not after 4 years. Not after building their most profitable account. I didn't realize that sometimes people don't want the person who builds the house. They want the one who knows how to stand in it and claim ownership. When I pulled into my driveway that afternoon with the cardboard box beside me, my mother's car was already there. Linda Donovan had a sixth sense for trouble. She was standing at my kitchen sink when I walked in, washing a plate I'd left from breakfast. "You're home early," she said without turning around. I set the box down on the table. The silence that followed said everything. She dried her hands slowly before facing me. Her eyes, the same gray-blue as mine, scanned my expression. "What did they do?" she asked quietly. And that was when my composure cracked. Not in loud sobs, not just a single tear I couldn't stop. "They let me go," I whispered. She didn't gasp, didn't curse. She simply pulled out a chair and sat across from me, as if preparing for a long conversation. "Tell me exactly what happened," she said. So I did. Every detail. Every overlooked credit. Every meeting where my name vanished. Every polite smile from Morgan. Every carefully worded critique from Chadwick. When I finished, my throat felt raw. Mom leaned back and studied me for a moment. "They took your job," she said evenly. "But don't you dare let them take your talent, too." I looked down at my hands. "I don't know if I have it anymore," I admitted. She reached across the table and squeezed my fingers. "Paige," she said, her voice steady as stone. "Talent doesn't disappear because someone else claimed it. It waits, and if you're brave enough, it works for you instead of them." Outside, a lawnmower hummed somewhere down the street. Life going on, indifferent to my small collapse. But something in her words settled inside me. Not hope. Not yet. Just the faintest ember of defiance. And sometimes that's enough to begin. For the first week after they fired me, I barely left the house. I told people I was taking a breather. That's what professionals say when they're trying not to unravel in public. But the truth was simpler. I felt embarrassed. There's a particular kind of humiliation that comes from being replaced by someone you trained. It sits heavy in your chest like swallowed metal. Every time my phone buzzed, I flinched, half, expecting another LinkedIn update announcing Morgan's well-deserved promotion. By the third day, it came. Morgan Hayes promoted to senior strategy lead at Sterling Rowe. 37 congratulatory comments. Chadwick's was the longest. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. My mother found me like that, sitting at the dining table, still in pajamas at 2 in the afternoon. "Have you eaten?" she asked. I shrugged. She placed a bowl of soup in front of me anyway. Chicken and rice, the kind she made when I was sick as a child. "You know," she said casually, taking the seat across from me, "when your father's shop burned down, everyone assumed he'd retire." I looked up. I'd heard the story before, but not like this. "He sat at the same table," she continued, tapping the wood gently, "and for 2 weeks he stared at his hands. He said, 'Maybe I'm not meant to build anymore.'" "What did you say?" I asked. I told him the fire didn't change his hands. The words landed differently now. I glanced around my small dining room, the pale blue walls, the sunlight pooling across the floor, the scratch near the edge of the table where I dropped a toolbox years ago. This wasn't just furniture, it was history. Tagga. Mom slid a legal pad toward me. Write down what you know how to do. I almost laughed. Mom, write it. So I did. Operational analysis, workflow optimization, client acquisition strategy, manufacturing efficiency modeling, vendor negotiations. The list stretched longer than I expected. And now, she said, that one took longer. Atlas Manufacturing, Ridgeway Components, Point 3 mid-tier suppliers I'd salvaged from contract disputes. A logistics firm whose profit margin increased 12% after I restructured their process map. Seeing it in ink shifted something. These weren't just tasks. Why are you waiting for someone to hire you? The idea had flickered in my mind, but fear had smothered it quickly. Starting a firm takes money, clients, infrastructure. It takes courage, she corrected gently. The rest can be built. That night I didn't spiral. I opened my laptop. I registered a business name before I could talk myself out of it. Donovan Strategy Group. Simple, clean, mine. The filing fee made my stomach tighten, but when the confirmation email arrived, I felt a pulse of something unfamiliar. Ownership. The next morning, I turned my dining table into an office. I stacked books under my monitor to lift it to eye level. I cleared one drawer for invoices. I taped a handwritten note to the wall. They can't take what you build yourself. The first client didn't come from a grand announcement. It came from a voicemail. Paige. Hash. It's Harold from Ridgeway. I heard you left Sterling and Rowe. I don't know what happened, but are you consulting independently by any chance? I sat up straighter. I am, I replied before doubt could interrupt. He exhaled audibly. Good. We've been having some issues with throughput delays. I was hoping you could take a look. When I hung up, I didn't scream or jump. I just placed both palms flat on the table and whispered, okay. The contract was modest, small retainer, limited scope. But when Harold wired the first payment, I stared at the number in my business account like it was a miracle. It wasn't revenge. It was proof. The days settled into rhythm. Coffee at dawn, calls by mid-morning, data review in the afternoons. I worked barefoot most days, sunlight warming the floorboards beneath me. There was no receptionist, no glass conference room, just me and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. And yet, I felt clearer than I had in months. Still, there were moments when doubt crept in. Like the afternoon I ran into Tessa Nguyen at the grocery store. She'd worked at Sterling and Rowe years before I joined. Brilliant analyst, soft-spoken, overlooked. I remembered her name from archived files. Paige, she asked cautiously near the produce section. I heard. What happened? I braced for pity. Instead, she leaned closer. They did something similar to me. We ended up in the cafe next door. Coffee growing cold between us as she described being sidelined. Her models rebranded under someone else's leadership. I thought maybe I just wasn't assertive enough, she admitted. I studied her hands as she spoke, steady, precise, the hands of someone who built things carefully. Would you ever consider consulting? I asked. She blinked. On my own. Not alone, I said slowly. With me. The silence that followed wasn't doubt. It was possibility. 2 weeks later, Tessa joined Donovan Strategy Group. I couldn't offer her a grand salary at first. Just profit, sharing, and honesty. I don't want you invisible here, I told her on her first official day, which consisted of sitting across from me at the dining table. If you build it, your name is on it. Her eyes softened. That's all I ever wanted, she said. We grew quietly. 1 client became 3, became 6. Word spread. Not loudly, but steadily. Companies talked. They mentioned the woman who used to be at Sterling and Rowe, the one who actually listened. Then, one evening, as Tessa and I reviewed quarterly projections, she looked up from her laptop. Have you noticed something? She asked. What? Atlas Manufacturing's contract with Sterling and Rowe is up for renewal in 8 months. The room felt suddenly smaller. Atlas, my chest tightened, but not from fear this time. From memory. That's their biggest account, Tessa continued carefully. I know, I said. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it hovering between us. 49. That's how many strategic touch points I'd mapped out in my head before I even said it aloud. If we're going to approach them, I said slowly. We don't do it emotionally. We do it meticulously. Tessa nodded. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming truth. But truth, I'd learned, doesn't shout. It prepares, and so we began. If you had walked past my house that spring, you would have seen nothing extraordinary. Just two women at a dining table, laptops open, coffee cups multiplying like quiet witnesses. No dramatic speeches, no grand declarations. Just preparation, but inside that small room, we were building something that required more discipline than anger. Oh, 9 touch points, Tessa repeated. Why 40? 9. Because 50 would feel obsessive, I said with a faint smile. 49 feels intentional. She laughed under her breath, and the tension eased. We didn't start with Atlas directly. That would have been reckless. Instead, we began mapping their ecosystem, suppliers, secondary vendors, former executives who had moved to smaller firms, even logistics partners who'd shifted routes over the last year. I still remembered the cadence of Atlas's fiscal cycle, the way their CEO preferred to review proposals on Thursdays, the fact that their operations director drank peppermint tea during meetings. Those details weren't gossip. They were relationships. Touchpoint 1 was a former procurement manager who had retired the previous fall. I reached out with a simple message. I'd love to reconnect and hear how retirement is treating you. We met for coffee, he mentioned casually. That Atlas had been struggling with delayed output in one of their Midwest plants. Sterling Rowe keeps promising a breakthrough, he said, stirring sugar into his cup. But it feels recycled. Recycled. I tucked that word away. Touchpoints 2 through 12 were variations of the same approach. Conversations. Listening. Never once mentioning revenge or dissatisfaction. Just curiosity. At night, when the house fell quiet, the line between the two is thinner than people admit. One evening, I confessed that fear to my mother while she folded laundry on the couch. What if this is just about proving something? I asked. She smoothed a pillowcase thoughtfully. And what if it is? I frowned. Proving you're capable isn't vanity, she said. It's correction. Correction. That word steadied me. By touchpoint 27, patterns emerged. Atlas was frustrated with stagnation. They wanted innovation, but felt locked into loyalty with Sterling Rowe. Contracts have a way of... Tessa and I built a shadow proposal. Not to send, not yet, but to test our ideas. We studied manufacturing bottlenecks specific to Atlas's product lines. We ran simulations using public production data. We refined it until it felt sharp enough to cut through complacency. Some nights we worked until the moonlight replaced the sun across the table. My shoulders ached. My eyes burned. But there was something deeply satisfying about exhaustion that comes from ownership. Around touchpoint 35, something unexpected happened. Morgan called me. I almost didn't answer. Her voice sounded different, less polished, more hurried. Paige, I just wanted to check in, she said lightly. I heard you started your own firm. Yes, I replied evenly. That's bold. There was a pause long enough to measure. I hope there's no hard feelings, she added. Business can be complicated. Complicated. I pictured her standing in the glass conference room where my slides once glowed on the wall. I don't carry hard feelings, I said carefully. I carry lessons. Silence. Well, she recovered. I wish you success. After we hung up, I realized my hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. Tessa and I looked at each other across the table. That's our window, she whispered. We finalized our proposal over the next 2 weeks. Every slide, precise. Every data point verified twice. No fluff, no ego. I insisted on one thing, transparency. And if we pitched Atlas, we would disclose my history with Sterling Rowe. Not dramatically, not defensively, just truthfully. I don't want them thinking this is personal, I told Tessa. It isn't, she agreed. It's strategic. Touchpoint 49 was a formal inquiry email. Subject line, Operational Efficiency Proposal, Atlas Manufacturing. I stared at the cursor blinking over the send button. My dining room was quiet except for the hum of the dishwasher. The late afternoon light filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows across the table where this entire resurrection had begun. "Ready?" Tessa asked gently. I exhaled slowly. This wasn't about humiliation anymore. It wasn't about Morgan's promotion or Chadwick's polished dismissals. It was about whether I believed in my own work enough to place it back into the world that had rejected it. "I'm ready," I said. I clicked send. The waiting was worse than the firing. 3 days passed, then 5. On the 7th morning, my phone buzzed while I was pouring coffee. Unknown number. "MS Donovan," a calm voice asked when I answered. "This is Richard Hale from Atlas Manufacturing. We received your proposal. Our board would like to invite you to present in person." The kitchen seemed to tilt slightly. "In person," I repeated. "Yes, next Thursday." "Next Thursday." I thanked him, ended the call, and stood very still. Tessa watched me from across the table. "Well," she asked. I met her eyes. "We're going back," I said quietly. "Back to the building where my badge no longer worked. Back to the glass walls that once reflected my ambition. Back to the place that had rewritten my contributions as someone else's success. But this time, I wouldn't be walking in as an employee. I would be walking in as competition. And for the first time since the day they fired me, I felt something steady settle in my chest. Not anger, not fear, just clarity. The morning of the presentation, I woke before my alarm, not because I was anxious, though I was, but because my body seemed to understand the weight of the day before my mind did. The house was still dark. I moved quietly, brewing coffee, pressing my glass with careful strokes. Navy, structured, professional, but not confrontational. I didn't want to look like I was returning for war. I wanted to look like I belonged. Tessa arrived at 7 sharp. She carried her laptop case with both hands, like it held something fragile and sacred. "Ready?" she asked softly. "As I'll ever be." The drive downtown felt shorter than it used to, or maybe my heart was beating faster. When the Sterling Rowe building came into view, my breath caught, not from longing, but from memory. The glass exterior reflected the morning sky, cool and indifferent. 2. Andifina. For a moment I saw myself months ago walking through those revolving doors, believing loyalty was enough. We parked across the street. "Let's go," I said. The lobby hadn't changed. Same polished marble, same faint scent of citrus cleaner. The receptionist, new, asked for our names. "Paige Donovan," I said calmly. "Donovan Strategy Group." She typed it in without recognition. That anonymity felt strangely freeing. The elevator ride up to the executive floor was silent except for the soft hum of cables. Tessa adjusted her glasses. I rolled my shoulders back once. When the doors opened, the conference room at the end of the hallway stood waiting, and so did they. Chadwick Sterling stood near the far wall, hands clasped behind his back. Morgan sat at the long oak table, tablet already open. 2 other Sterling Rowe partners occupied seats along the side. But at the head of the table sat Richard Hale from Atlas, silver hair, sharp eyes, posture upright. For half a second, I felt the ghost of my old insecurity rise. Then I remembered the dining table. I remembered 49 touch points. I remembered my mother's voice. "They can't take your talent." Richard stood. "MS Donovan, thank you for coming." His handshake was firm. "Thank you for the opportunity," I replied. Chadwick's expression remained composed, but there was something new in his gaze. Assessment. Morgan offered a small smile. It didn't reach her eyes. We set up without hurry. Tessa connected the HDMI cable. I placed my printed executive summaries at each seat. When the first slide illuminated the screen, the room grew still. I began. Not defensively, not aggressively, just clearly. Atlas Manufacturing has experienced a 7.3% throughput decline in Plant 3 over the last 2 quarters, I said, clicking to the next slide. The root issue isn't labor inefficiency, as previously assumed. It's vendor sequencing delay compounded by redundant quality checks. I watched Richard's eyes narrow, not in skepticism, but in focus. Slide after slide, we walked them through the data. Clean visuals, precise language, no embellishment. At one point, Chadwick interrupted. Those assumptions rely heavily on internal metrics, he said evenly. Metrics you no longer have access to. I met his gaze. They rely on publicly available production reports referenced with supplier shipment data, I replied. The conclusions are replicable. Silence. Tessa transitioned seamlessly. Morgan shifted in her seat. When we reached the final slide, a phased implementation plan spanning 12 months, I paused. There's one more thing, I said. The room held its breath. I previously worked on the Atlas account while employed at Sterling Rowe, I continued. I want to be transparent about that history. My familiarity with your operations is an asset. But today's proposal stands independently of past affiliation. No accusation. No bitterness. Just truth. Richard leaned back slowly. Why now? He asked. The question wasn't hostile. It was curious, because I believe Atlas, and because I believe I can deliver it. The meeting ended without applause. Corporate rooms rarely offered dramatic reactions. Instead, Richard closed his folder and said, "We'll be in touch." That was it. We gathered our materials. As I turned toward the door, Chadwick stepped forward. Thank you, I replied. Morgan's eyes flicked between us. You've built something. Substantial, Chadwick added. I built it before, I said gently. Now it just has my name on it. For the first time, he didn't have a response. The waiting stretched longer this time. 2 weeks, then 3. Then I told myself to focus on current clients, on steady growth. But every time my phone rang, my pulse spiked. One Thursday afternoon, almost exactly a month after the presentation, an email notification flashed across my screen. Subject: Atlas Manufacturing Contract Decision. My fingers hovered over. Tessa stood beside me, silent. I clicked. We are pleased to inform Donovan Strategy Group. I didn't read the rest out loud. I couldn't. My throat closed unexpectedly. Tessa covered her mouth with both hands. We got it, she whispered. I nodded. We didn't scream. We just held each other in the quiet dining room where this entire journey had begun. Outside, the world continued as usual, cars passing, birds shifting in trees. But inside that small space, something irreversible had happened. We had taken back what was ours. Not through sabotage, not through exposure, through... That evening I called my mother. They chose us, I said simply. She exhaled slowly. I never doubted they would. I did, I admitted. She chuckled softly. That's why I'm your mother. Within 3 months, everything shifted. Atlas's implementation phase began producing measurable improvements. Other clients, including 2 former Sterling Rowe accounts, reached out discreetly. Our revenue doubled, then tripled. We moved from the dining table to a modest office space downtown. Nothing extravagant, just clean desks, natural light, and our names on the door. Donovan Strategy Group. But growth has consequences. And across the street from our new office stood the building where this story began. One afternoon, as I stepped out to grab coffee, I noticed unusual activity there. Black sedans pulling up, executives entering in tight clusters, an emergency board meeting. Through the glass, I glimpsed Marcus Webb, Sterling Rowe's CEO, his expression sharper than usual. I stood on the sidewalk longer than necessary. Not gloating, not trembling, just observing. Months ago, I had walked out of that building carrying a cardboard box. Now, they were scrambling to understand the competitor who had taken their largest client, and they didn't even know her story. Yet, I didn't intend to linger across the street that afternoon. I told myself I was just waiting for the light to change, just finishing the last sip of my coffee. I'm Saturday. Just stretching my legs before heading back to the office. But the truth is, I wanted to see their faces. The Sterling Rowe building looked the same. Polished glass, sharp lines, expensive restraint. Yet something in the air around it felt unsettled. Executives moved with tighter shoulders. Assistants whispered near. An emergency board meeting meant one thing: loss. Atlas had been their anchor account, the one they cited in investor briefings, the one they paraded in quarterly updates. Losing it wouldn't just bruise revenue, it would bruise pride. I saw Marcus Webb step out of a black sedan. Tall, silver at the temples, always immaculate. He rarely appeared unless something significant was unfolding. He paused on the sidewalk, adjusting his cufflinks, and for a fleeting second his gaze scanned the street. It passed over me without recognition. That anonymity, the fact that the CEO of my former company didn't even know my face, struck deeper than any firing. I wasn't angry. I was clear. I turned and walked back toward Donovan's strategy group. Growth sounds glamorous until you're living inside it. Within weeks of securing Atlas, our inbox filled with inquiries. Mid-size manufacturers. A logistics firm in Ohio. A packaging distributor who had heard about our phased efficiency model. Tessa and I hired 2 additional analysts, both women who had been overlooked in larger firms. One, the other not assertive enough. I recognized those phrases. I made one thing explicit in every interview. If you build it, your name goes on it. We instituted a simple rule: credit follows contribution. No exceptions. There were nights I stayed late in our new office, long after the others had left. The hum of the HVAC system echoing softly. I would sit at my desk and look at the framed photo of my father's workshop that I'd placed near my monitor. He'd rebuilt after fire. I had rebuilt after dismissal. Different disasters. Same hands. Still, success didn't erase everything. Some evenings, when exhaustion pressed heavily against my temples, I'd replay that day in the conference room when Chadwick told me I struggled to delegate. I'd hear Morgan's careful silence. I had to confront something uncomfortable. They hadn't stolen my talent, but I had allowed myself to be small inside a system that preferred polish over substance. That realization wasn't bitter. It was liberating. 2 months after the Atlas contract began, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. Marcus Webb would like to request a brief meeting. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. Tessa looked up from her desk. Everything okay? The CEO of Sterling Rowe wants to meet, I said evenly. Her eyebrows lifted. About, he didn't say. We considered ignoring it, but avoidance felt juvenile. So I replied, well, time and place, neutral territory. The day of the meeting, Marcus arrived precisely on time. Navy suit, controlled expression. "Ems, Donovan," he greeted, extending his hand. "Minder Webb." We sat. He didn't waste time. "I'll be direct," he said. "Atlas's departure was unexpected. I've reviewed the internal timeline. Your name surfaced." I folded my hands on the table. I imagine it did. His eyes studied me, not dismissively, but analytically. "You were terminated during a restructuring," he continued carefully. "There's disagreement among partners regarding that decision." I held his gaze. I wasn't restructured, I was replaced. The cafe noise faded in my ears. Marcus didn't flinch. Perhaps, he paused, then added, "You've built something formidable in a short time." "I built it over 4 years," I corrected gently. "Just under a different logo." For the first time, something shifted in his posture. "This isn't about retribution," he said. "I know," I replied. "If it were, I would have handled it differently." Silence stretched between us. "Sterling Rowe is undergoing internal review," he admitted. "We're evaluating leadership alignment, corporate language for accountability." He leaned. "If there's anything you'd like formally noted about your departure," there it was. An opening. I could have detailed every meeting where my work was misattributed, every subtle undermining, every strategic exclusion. Instead, I chose differently. "Note this," I said calmly. "When you overlook the people doing the building, eventually they build somewhere else." Marcus absorbed that without argument. He stood after another brief exchange, offering a final nod. "Congratulations on your success, MS. Donovan." "Thank you," I said. As he walked away, I realized something profound. I didn't need. The meeting wasn't closure. It was confirmation. That evening, I stood again across the street from my old office building, not to watch, not to measure, just to feel. Months ago, I had stood in a parking garage with a cardboard box and a fractured sense of self. I thought losing that job meant losing my worth. But worth doesn't live in titles. It lives in capability, in integrity. in the quiet courage to begin again when beginning feels humiliating. Through the glass, I saw lights flicker on in the executive floor. Meetings, adjustments, perhaps even difficult conversations. I didn't wish them harm. I didn't hope for, because the greatest revenge isn't destruction, it's distinction. It's succeeding so undeniably that the people who underestimated you are forced to say your name correctly. I adjusted my coat and turned away from the building. The streetlight shifted from red to green. And this time, I didn't look back. When people ask me now how I bounced back, I always smile a little. Because I didn't bounce. I broke first. I doubted myself. I questioned my instincts. I replayed conversations in my head at 3 a.m, wondering if I had missed some flaw in myself that everyone else could see. Losing that job wasn't just professional, it was personal. It felt like someone had rewritten my story without my permission. But here's what I learned sitting at that dining table with a legal pad and a mother who refused to let me shrink. Sometimes the greatest theft isn't your position. It's your confidence. It's your confidence. And if you let bitterness take root, they take that too. I didn't win because Morgan stumbled. I didn't win because Sterling and Rowe faltered. I won because I stopped asking for space and started building my own. There's a quiet dignity in that. Not flashy, not loud, just steady. I still drive past that building sometimes. Not to measure success, not to relive hurt. Just to remind myself how far a person can travel without ever leaving their own city. And I wonder, have you ever been overlooked? Ever watched someone else receive applause for work you poured your heart into? Ever felt erased? If you have, I hope you remember this. Take and close a door. They can question your value. They can even show you out with a cardboard box. But they cannot take your hands. And if your hands still know how to build, you are never truly finished. Tell me, would you have done what I did? And if this story touched something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the most powerful comeback begins in the quietest room. And sometimes that room is your own dining table.